Okay, then let's recommence. So I was thinking that we stated, didn't we, at the start that telling stories, narratives is probably easiest with film and animation, moving image, with sound and all that sort of stuff. We've looked at graphics, illustration, photography, sort of art, fine arty type practices from early days. So we've looked at those. I was just wondering if anyone, just before we start, like, how does storytelling happen in other creative practices? Like, I was thinking, like fashion. Um, is there a way that storytelling happens, or narratives are made in fashion? I was thinking of fashion and what are the architecture. Does that architecture have a sort of storytelling part of it? Design areas, textiles, fashion, architecture. I'm just trying to think of things which aren't in this lecture. Well, we know film and animation aren't, but of those practices. Anyone got any ideas? How is there any storytelling goes on in fashion or architecture or textiles? Ah, yes, okay, that's interesting. So Clara's saying sculpture, Apollo, those classical sculptures, but I think it's only a story, isn't it? Because we attach the story we know to it, or we. I don't know about that one, Clara. Kind of. Yeah, it's a representation of a story, isn't it? Of a particular part. Yeah, I guess it's a representation of a key part of a story. That's quite interesting. Gabriella, theme unifies a catwalk collection. Yeah, okay. So designers do have themes based around, like, I don't know, 1960s punk or whatever, or they have a theme around might have a theme around yeah, they sometimes have themes around political periods of time, don't they? Or they have fashion will have themes around yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess that's interesting. A catwalk collection, the way it's ordered. Khadija saying designing that they did in the past, yeah. But again, that sort of like is us really piecing together what we know of the past with the present. So we're making the link. But yeah, it is a way of storytelling. It's quite loose, I suppose. Murals, Florrie says, that's an interesting one. Um, yeah, I guess we saw one of those early on the column, the Trajan column, didn't we? That's like a mural, kind of like the Bayeux Tapestry is sort of a mural. That's a textiles piece, isn't it? So I guess murals, definitely fresco murals. Yeah, yeah. But I guess that's in the realm of art, sculpture, which kind of where storytelling does kind of go. Costume, that's an interesting one from Clara. Um, but yeah, costume is like a part of a theatre or a film, film production or a theatrical production, isn't it? So it's a key part of that, which we then attach the rest of the stuff to. That's interesting from Gabriella, talking about prints on fabrics. Yeah, definitely. So they tell stories quite often, don't they? Yeah, that's very true. Not that complicated ones. I guess we want the fabrics of four really, but yeah. Victorian dresses, Khadijah's saying. Yeah, but again, it's like something we need to know about Victoria. We need to attach our own stories to it. It's not telling us much of a story. It's we're doing a lot of work, aren't we, with that? Graffiti, definitely. I think definitely. Um, Graffiti is definitely telling. It has a narrative, has a story. It's like a sort of frame from a graphic novel sometimes, isn't it? Graffiti, or a frame from a animation in some ways. Just summing it all up and putting it there. I mean, certainly, a lot of Banksy's work does lead us to think about the story of a cultural in a subculture or our current politics or our current social sort of situation. So yeah, it's definitely a kind of feeder. I suppose what I'm trying to do is get the idea of how much story can we get from the thing, and how much do we have to add ourselves to make the story up. And I think with the sort of work we're looking at, there's always an element of us having to add a lot. Yeah, but with photography, you get the text to accompany it, to tell us the story. So you've got image and text working. The graphic novel's an easy one. Anime and stuff is so yeah, it's kind of, some have more than others of that balance, of that continuum, don't they? Anyway, good stuff. Yeah. Yeah, Gabriella sums it up. There's a story in everything, just has to be found. That's very true. Very true. Yeah, that's well summed up. Right, let's move on from that. Well done. That's good. So yeah, I want to talk about the tableau, and in particularly Mohammed Barissa's work, which is proving quite important in photographic history, I think. So what's a tableau? References and definitions include an interlude during a scene when all the performers freeze and then resume action as before. So people stop and they start again. So that's one possible definition. A group of person and props used to produce a picturesque effect. Yeah. But then there's the idea of the tableau vivant, representation of a scene, painting, sculpture by a person or group posed silent and motionless. Yeah, so we get the idea. And this is one of the earliest ones we'd say is a tableau vivant. I mean, I've shown this to you so many times, Da Vinci's The Last Supper, but it is an action scene. The supper's going on, then it stops, and we've got a frozen moment with the story before and after. Yeah, so classic tableau. And we know that The Last Supper is brought up to date and reused and repackaged, appropriated a million times. And there's a classic example, the Battlestar Galactica ad from 2008, where Jesus was replaced by the woman here. Looking slightly different, but she's wearing red like he is. That's the similarity there ends. We've got the person pointing, and it says the final revelation. So it's quite a clever use of that tableau. Yeah. And a very similar one, this long and thin, the main character in the middle. This is Ray Lander's Two Ways of Life, very, very famous Victorian composite image made up of lots and lots of different images printed on the same piece of paper. Very primitive sort of darkroom thing. The Two Ways of Life. So we've got the high and mighty sort of like poets and muses and thinkers. And then in the corners here, you've got the people working in the cellars, the depraved and the sort of workers, and so you've got the two ways of life, a classic Victorian representation of Victorian England. We could say that Hopper's work is like tableau type work. And again, you've got this idea of Hopper's work is often seen like a sort of stage theatre, and the action is stopped, where it's at that lovely place where it encourages us to add a story based around our own experiences, doesn't it? Our own sort of knowledge of things. So the couple here in the evening, summer evening, you know, outside the house on the decking. There's all sorts of stories we can kind of attach to that. And here's the famous, very, very famous image, which I think we've probably looked at before. One of the most talked about paintings ever made, Velázquez, Las Meninas from 1656. Extraordinary piece of work, so kind of brave and unusual, wacky composition. All sorts of stuff going on. I mean, it really is crazy. So The Ladies in Waiting, 1656 by Velázquez, leading artist of the Spanish Golden Age. It's just extraordinary. Complex and enigmatic composition raises questions about reality and illusion, creates an uncertain relationship between the viewer and the figures depicted. It's kind of like they're looking at us, but we're sort of looking in. There's a crazy old relationship going on. Yeah, because of these complexities, Las Meninas has been one of the most widely analysed works in Western painting. So you've got, these are some of the things in it. Mirror, here, look, reflecting the subjects, the king, queen, realities and illusion. So the mirror is very important there. It's not really reflecting what it should be. Can't just reflect these things, can it? So there's a lot of sort of illusion going on there. We've got a couple of dwarfs here soothing the dog, who's resting over here, but there's this idea of wildness restrained. Yeah, there's a feeling of the camera's presence and a higher watcher, someone looking down, watching, but also because it's like, I don't know, the perspective thing, it just looks like a camera obscura or some sort of, yeah, camera looking through a frame or something like that. So it's a tableau, which is Las Meninas here. This is a little tableau thing going on with her, with these three characters within the bigger tableau. Yeah. And the usher here is drawing a curtain to allow more light in, sort of backlight in, because it's a gloomy old place, isn't it, at the back? That's just a few of the fascinating things that are going on in it. Here's Velázquez himself here, the painter. So it's endlessly complex story, which we piece together from a whole load of disjointed kind of like elements. Yeah. King and queen here, so marginalized. They're in the corner. You know, it's kind of like he's painting them, I think, but this is much more important what's going on. And there, the king and queen are there in the darkness. So, yeah, extraordinarily enigmatic is the word. And again, Las Meninas has been reworked so many times. This is the really dark sort of photographer, Joel Peter Witkin's version from 1987, Las Meninas after Velázquez. And Joel Peter Witkin, yeah, has the figure opening the light, getting light in as the mirror reflecting the king and queen. We've got some sort of Joe Miro sort of surrealist kind of thing. Here's the Las Meninas here. We've got the dog on a leash. We've got the painter. So more narratives going on up here. Yeah, crazy, wonderful reinterpretation. Oh, anyway, let's look at Peripherique, which is the work by Barissa from 2007. Means sort of like ring road or surroundings. And yeah, ring road, 2007. Periphery. This is a typical image from Barissa's work. And it's a classic tableau, isn't it? But very contemporary. So it's like contemporary people. It's almost like a fashion image, some of his work. Action stopped, you know, in a very sort of tense moment sometimes. So he's interested in the territories and the suburbs where he grew up. What makes him particular? Places these suburbs in the field of art, treats them as a visual conceptual object. Yeah. The feeling comes no doubt from a mixture of harmony and very slight illusion, which rises from banal, familiar, anti-spectacular, almost documentary scenes. I think that's that's the thing. You get this kind of like, they're not really documentary, but they sort of could be. So they're like a constructed document. And these are quotes from the Portfolio magazine from 2009. But if we look, as is always, this is contextual study, so we're trying to look at the bigger context around this work, and Barissa's is full of it, so that's why it's a good example for us to look at. Very important is this, the bloodied head of Caravaggio's Head of Goliath from 1606. Barissa claims was the first photographer. He invented that photographic moment, and who knows, perhaps even the decisive moment championed by Cartier-Bresson. So Caravaggio's work is full of these moments, almost like a photographic, capture. Okay, which painters didn't really do at that time. It was always much stiller and much more posed and quiet. But Caravaggio's there's a lot more action. So Barissa sees the work of Caravaggio in his. And here's, of course, Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People from 1830, French Revolution. And this is a wonderful example of a tableau, classic tableau composition, going up to the sort of pyramid triangle. The guy with the raised guns, Liberty with the flag. We've got the dead around. We've got the revolution happening in full swing. So this is obviously an influence for Barissa, I think. This is an archetype image for French people, isn't it? It's what they've lived with, this kind of image in the background, their lives, yeah. And Barissa's work is, based around the 2005 French riots. I don't know if you remember or know about this. A 3-week period of riots in the suburbs of Paris and other French cities. So quite a big, massive event in France, to be honest, in Paris. And here's Figaro. Le Figaro's, reportage is this kind of idea, this simple documentary, simple photojournalist image and banner headline, The unrest started on 20th of October, where police were investigating a reported break-in at a building site. Local youths scattered in order to avoid interrogation, as they would. 3 of them hid in a substation. 2 died from electrocution, resulting in a power blackout. So this is when the unrest started. The story started to evolve what had happened. And, there was disquiet and tension. And then the unrest sort of happened. There's a classic picture, lots of things being burnt on the streets, lots of people running around, rioting. Yeah. The incident ignited rising tensions about youth unemployment and police harassment in the poorer housing estates. Followed 3 weeks of rioting throughout France. There was a state of emergency on the 8th of November, extended for 3 more weeks. Riots resulted in more than 8,000 vehicles being burned, more than 2,700 individuals arrested. A lot of you won't have been born at this point, but I remember it as being a really turbulent time for Europe, and it went on a long time, and it was this feeling that things were really going to get out of control. Okay. Anyway, Barissa's response, it's not different to the normal photography of people rioting on the streets. So Barissa's response, quiet and understated, choosing to look at underlying tension and daily life in the suburbs around the Ring Road in Toulouse. Okay, so he's kind of like, and this is a great image, the mirror. So you've got the reflected in the water, and you've got a group of young males gathering around, talking about stuff. These are all constructed, so they're all like staged, all these pictures. So it's like he's telling a still more complex story in a more subtle sort of way. Okay, and here's the window. Oh, so the genre is documentary, portraiture, but there is definitely theatrical, cinematic, sort of fashion genres going on in here as well. He's mixing up a lot of genres, again, to hint at a more sort of complex story, I think. But also, obviously, sociology, anthropology. It's about the current situation, the way people are living in society, the history of that. Yeah. So pictures like this. So yeah, there's that tension. So they're not making any sort of like obvious statements, or this is right, this is wrong, this is what happened, this wasn't. It's trying to sort of say the story is subtle and more complex, although it ends up in a not very subtle place. The underlying sort of story is one of kind of like, with a history and a presence and a daily sort of But some of the images are very sort of tender as well. So there's some quite violent sort of images and quite sort of, but also some quite tender ones here, like the hand on the woman's stomach. Um, so carefully constructed stories. Yeah. And I think this one's great. The guy with the dog sat on top with that hillock. So full of symbolic sort of. So what I'm saying is these are great stories. I think all these pictures, they have great stories in them, don't they? Um, and they are linked to a bigger story, which is a more sort of like headline news type story. But these are stories within that story. And this is the imaginary circle, which I think is great. So showing the sort of angst and the raging sort of fire that's within or beneath, and the guy with the skeleton outfit looking at it. It's great. So that's Barissa, which I think is a really strong piece of work in terms of narrative storytelling based around quite a complicated subject. Other photographers have done, use the tableau approach, tableau strategy to tell these stories. And this is Gregory Crewdson, who's a very well-known art photographer. So Crewdson's uncanny cinematic photographs capture the ennui, eeriness, and decay at the heart of small-town America. So these are very much about those small towns in America on the outskirts or in the middle of nowhere. But they're imbued with this sort of science fiction vibe. So they look like stills out of science fiction films. Yeah. A series called Twilight. So that period, 5, 6, 7 o'clock when the light's just going and everything's in that eerie light. We often quite often his pictures are, I've noticed, single people looking a bit lost or being affected by something. And I think all these examples of that. So this light could be the police, it could be a UFO. What is she looking at? There's a strange light coming in. So again, it's an Edward Hopper type narrative, isn't it? What is happening, And here's Red Star Express from 2018, 2019. So quite often his work is kind of like, again, subtle things about to happen. So it's called the Red Star Express. I think there's a train here about to come through, and then all these kids on the bikes have just stopped. So he plans out his large format frames with meticulous detail. The photographer often employs large crews and film equipment to ensure that the final images evoke significant narrative and atmosphere. So these are like film shots, film sets, really, without all the film going on. So he uses cinematographers and lots of the technical baggage of film to create his work. Okay, we'll just look at a few contemporary narratives now. Not that contemporary, but a few other ideas about narrative. So, Paul Arago as a painter is a clear example that we could use here. It's very common storytelling in more sort of contemporary practice. This is Arago's The Dance. So Paul Arago, she's no longer with us now, but a very important painter right up until recently. Many of Arago's paintings seem to suggest mysterious narratives, frequently evoking childhood memories, family scenes, fairy tales, and myths. The figures in the dance may be seen in symbolic terms. Great. So this is a classic narrative painting. I don't think we can find a narrative painting which isn't quite as representative of the theme. We've got this idea of time sort of passing. We've got the moon. We've got the sea coming and going, the clouds, and then you've got the dance going on. So movement. You've got families or friends. You've got a community, but very much based around fairy tales or myths. This is Amy Cutler, who's a pretty fascinating illustrator. Yeah, an artistic mixologist. An idea can come from anywhere, rising most often when she's sketchy. Inspiration from sources: US military survivor manuals, nature books, Japanese wood block prints, Persian miniatures, Indonesian designs. So they're a really strange mix up of styles and content. But she does manage to tell quite like yeah, very quirky stories in her work. I think it's fair to say. This is Embargo. So again, these look like sort of Victorian. um I don't know what these are called, these things on the front of boats, but yeah, they got a name, haven't they? But on the front of boats, Victorian women sort of leading these boats forward with dolls and strange sort of craft objects being carried around with them. So these are stories, I think, which are like surrealist and slightly unusual, out of everyone's comfort zone. Um, it's, yeah, almost exclusively female. Women occupy unfamiliar tribe. That's right, whose rituals are carried out with great seriousness, no matter the absurdity of their tasks. Here's Embargo. Yeah, females with fancy updos, outfitted in what look like 19th century day dresses, are turned into the prows of ships. So I think she's a classic one who brings in sort of unusual elements to to kind of get our imagination going down a wacky sort of wacky story and a wacky narrative. It's a subconscious, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Really, it taps into something in the subconscious to create these visual narratives. And for her, it kind of goes way back. So these are like archetypal sort of imagery and symbols that exist within us. And this is tiger mending, which I think is absolutely great. So these women here, they've got their sort of like needles or knitting or whatever, and they're trying to sort of mend these tigers. So there's a beautiful story. Um, yeah. In childhood, I thought drawing was a bit like voodoo. I could work out my struggles and take control of certain situations. I mean, what I love about her work as well, it's not overly technically brilliant. You know, I think she's got a very definite style, but it's not like you can look at it and, even if we haven't got the greatest skills with drawing, you can kind of see how it might be possible to do them. There's a sort of confidence in technique, I think, which I really like. Narratives are surreal, playful, original, always surprising. Yeah, that's the thing. There's a very surprising element often to them. Yeah, so some more photography here. This is Trish Morrissey's series called Front from 2005, which is rather fascinating. Again, it's kind of like a concept, put it in place, and then which leads to a sort of building of a narrative. So here she is. This her here. That's Trish Morrissey, the artist. So basically, what she does is sticks herself. When she finds a family with this work on a beach and says, "Look, can I be the mother for the photograph, or can I be the woman in this?" And she just replaces the woman figure in the scene. So she's not really the mother or the partner or whatever connected to these two. She just stuck herself in like a cuckoo, I think people call it. So yeah, contemporary photography, many narratives related. She swaps places with a woman in the family group, often the mother. Morrissey becomes the subject, the cuckoo in the group portrait. Um, so yeah, she's really upsetting a kind of very established stereotype story of a family and of who's part of that and who isn't. Yeah, here's another one. Um, she stuck herself in there, with this man and the three children. Um, Nothing to do with her. It's just a random sort of find. But I think it taps into that idea that we're quite comfortable making up things, making up stories to fit ourselves, even though they're completely no. If we just saw this, we'd assume she was the mother and the partner probably of this man, and they're the kids. Yeah, that's we would make these assumptions. However, that's wrong. So we visual artists have the power to create narratives which are completely not right. Yeah. Yeah, we talked a bit about fashion earlier. How does that create narratives? There are ways that it does. I mean, it certainly does within advertising. You know, if you look at Levi's ads, they're often sort of like harping back to, post Second World War and workers, needing jeans to sort of like wear on an everyday basis. So there's a narrative that goes on with certain brands. Nike is always telling the story of runners, young people who can kind of achieve massively by wearing Nike clothes. So there are fashion campaigns, I think, that do have implied narratives. But in recent years, fashion industry has moved into the moving image with narrative possibilities. We'll find a lot of fashion films on sort of the cool websites, or the cool sort of like, often not always mentioning the product actually. So it'll be like fancy narratives with people wearing fancy clothes. And they're mostly loose, open-ended narratives that hint at glamour and desire. They often utilize famous actors and directors, but the genre has never become as celebrated. I mean, this has been going on, I think, for a good 15 years, these fashion movies, but they don't ever seem to really break out into anywhere. They're kind of stuck between fashion, sort of traditional ways that's represented, and the film industry. So they have never really found a place outside of advertising. Okay. We'll finish off with Kerry James Marshall. So one of the most interesting contemporary painters working in America. So Kerry James Marshall, contemporary painter whose work explores the complex effects of the civil rights movement on the everyday life of African Americans. Yeah, so this is like School of Beauty, School of Culture. So it's like a sort of there's a hairdresser's here, and there's a tape poster. There's all sorts of narratives going on. It's like a beauty parlor, really, but it's kind of got there's family sort of dynamics going on. There's drama. There's an art poster with Chris O'Feely on. There's references to all sorts of things going on. So Marshall tells these, quite complicated stories. It's and then so the narrative scenes draw both from the history and the artist's own life. Marshall delves into obscure moments and objects important to contemporary and past Black culture. So there's a very particular context that Marshall's working around. And it's, so here we've got the studio. So we've got the Black woman sat there getting ready for the photo shoot. We've got for the portrait painting, got the painter here painting. So quite often there's like narratives within the narrative of Marshall's work, which I find so very interesting. And again, I like the style of the painting of Kerry Marshall. I don't think they're overly sophisticated. They're very sort of the form is very appropriate for the content. I think that's the best way of putting it. Great. Okay, let's finish up there. Then with Kerry Marshall. So what have we talked about? Key places for narratives, like photography, illustration, graphic novels, anime, all those sort of things. Places where narratives are more difficult to find. We talked about how in certain places the viewer's left to build narratives more than others. And we've talked quite a lot about how text kind of anchors narratives. Even a title under a painting, can actually give us the story. Yeah. So here, School of Beauty, School of Culture, it's saying, okay, if we didn't have that, we'd find it more difficult to unravel the story. Yeah. However, we've got that. So we can look at that relationship between beauty and culture, art and image, art and the street. It gives us a way into the narrative. So text is vitally important, even if it's not, really obvious. I mean, and when we look at, of course, this work, I mean, this leads us to that idea that if we didn't know what was going on, it wouldn't have the same strength or same sort of like power. And how do we know what's going on? Quite often the text, I don't think front is probably not enough to tell us what's going on here. So how much do we leave the narrative open and how much do we try and close it down? Yeah, these are the things that are going on with all this primarily 2D visual artwork. Yeah. So I guess that's the main message to take from this lecture today. How much do we want to tell people the whole thing? How much do we want them to do a bit of work for themselves? And that will depend massively on the context. So if you're doing a piece for a magazine or whatever, a newspaper, probably someone's going to want to know the fuller story. Okay. If you're doing a thing from an art gallery, probably not going to matter much, is it? Because often in art galleries, the whole point is to make up your own stuff. Yeah. If you're doing a photography essay for a book, you're probably going to put that story together. You're probably going to put that story together through different ways, through a combination of text and sequencing. Okay, so all these different contexts and genres have different ways of dealing with narrative. Yeah, and we've just touched upon quite a few of those today. Great. Okay, well, see you in a couple of weeks. We've got the next one is all about the exhibition, site of exhibition, or places that we look at work and how that affects what we see. So that's quite an interesting one. I think that's probably in about 3 weeks' time. And yeah, thank you all very much. Nice to see you all. Got a question from Jenny, trying to find a copy of Welcome to the Real World. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have a look for you. I'll leave the meeting open. I'll have a little look, see what I can find. Yeah, and I'll see what I can find and stick it in the chat. All right. Cheers, Gabriella. Thank you all very much for listening. We've touched upon a big area, and I hope it was useful. See you in a few weeks. Thanks, everyone. Right, let's have a look. Just stop recording.